Hafide Zamananasi Zu'us. Thank you everyone for being here today. The Guam Trademark Commission will now be called to order. For the record, in accordance with the Open Government Law, meeting notices were given to all Commission senatorial members, stakeholders, and all main media broadcasting outlets. The first notice was given on Wednesday, October 16th, 2019. The second notice was on Monday, October 21st, 2019. And today is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019. And the time is 8:51. We have 6 members that are present representing a quorum. So again, Sijus Maasi for attending this morning's meeting. We have the fall season coming up. We have Thanksgiving, Halloween, Christmas holidays, so I hope we'll all stick in here the best we can and make it through the fall holidays. So today's meeting is our 5th meeting, and the Commission last met on September 19th, 2019. So if we can go around the table and have everybody just for the record announce their name and who they're representing.
Frank Rabone, Guam Council of the Arts and Humanities.
Rita Nauta, representing the Office of the Speaker.
Good morning, Albert Perez at the Department of Revenue and Taxation.
Matthew Baza, the Guam Economic Development Authority.
Chris Lizama, Guam Visitors Bureau.
And I also want to mention that there are a couple of others who are here representing different entities. We have the speaker being represented. She is my vice chair. She's being represented by one of her staff members. And then we have another member who is here from Gita. So Sijus Masi for attending as well. Recapping last month's meeting, we continued our discussions towards identifying intangible arts. And so as we've talked about, that will just continue to be an ongoing process. And developing definitions for the various art forms. We also had Attorney Stacy Solis, formerly from the Office of the Attorney General, and she provided a presentation and an overview of Guam's patents, trademarks, and copyrights, Title V, GCA, Chapter 20, Article 4. Attorney Stacy Solis is now employed with the legislature and is currently a member of the legislative legal team. Additionally, Attorney Stephanie Mendiola, who formerly was with the legislature, the Committee on Rules, is now employed at the Attorney General's office, and she has been designated as the point of contact for this commission. So it will be, it's kind of an interesting switch of personnel. But we're happy to have both of them with us in one form or another. The Attorney General's office is a member of the Guam Trademark Commission. As attorney, Stephanie Mendiola settles into her new position with the Attorney General's office. We will request for her to continue the work of the Attorney Stacy Solis and provide an overview of the Trademark Counterfeiting Act, Title IX, GCA, Chapter 47, after she settles in. Today we will have 2 presentations on intellectual property rights and the Guam Economic Development Authority's presentation on the Guam Product Seal. So the first one will be by myself. Dr. Souter was meant to be here today, but she's not feeling well. And then we will conclude with Mr. Matthew Baza giving the overview of the Guam Product Seal. These 3 presentations were presentations that were given at the Marianas History Conference just a short time ago, several weeks ago. These discussions, I think that they've been proving useful for all of us They provide informed and meaningful direction for the Commission to move forward in creating the framework and scope necessarily in drafting the Guam Trademark Act. Let me rephrase that, Guam Cultural Trademark Act and the Guam Trademark and Intellectual Property Rights Act. So item 2A of the agenda is, let me just make sure that I'm following the agenda. Here it is. So for the new business, we will go ahead and dive right into the presentation workshop. So I'll go ahead and begin. Mine's just a basic overview of some of what's happened with intellectual property rights in the Pacific. There's actually much more that's going on, but I think part of what it helps us understand is how vibrant and ongoing that work is. There's really quite a lot of that activity going on in the Pacific, and I think part of it is because the indigenous peoples of the Pacific, they have so much to protect. So they've been very engaged and interested in getting these things settled. And then I give us some visual examples so that we can see and have some references of some of what's been challenged in the Pacific, in cultures that are similarly located and have some cultural similarities. And actually one of the bigger issues, I think we've talked about it a little bit, but one of the bigger issues is for us to at least just have in the back of our mind is that we do have shared cultural traits and we do have shared material culture to a degree with other peoples in the Pacific. And so how that's going to be helping us formulate what we develop. So let's go ahead and move into the first of the presentations, just that overview of the intellectual property rights in the Pacific. Yes. So here, like I said, this was part of our larger presentation, and all three of us, Mr. Matt Baza and Dr. Laura Souder, we all presented together. So if I could have the next slide. So for intellectual property in the Pacific, next. So one of the leading forces in the Pacific has been efforts by UNESCO. They've done a lot of work with intangible cultural heritage. There is an intangible cultural heritage list. It can be accessed online anytime anyone wants to look at some examples of what different countries are identifying and placing on the list, or different cultural indigenous groups, including those in the Pacific. With that, we had also talked about the fact that even though we are not a signatory under the United States and we don't have the ability to be individually recognized, we can have a non-governmental agency do some of that work and have us be participatory in that way. Next. And before I move on, I just want to mention, with the intangible cultural heritage, part of the importance of protecting that is not only just identifying it, but it helps, well, one, identify it. Sometimes we don't tease it apart, or we may have forgotten parts of it, or we may not recognize parts of it. So it brings it foremost into our minds. But then also it helps us all recognize and remember and maintain cultural diversity, which is one of the rich qualities of the Pacific and the rest of the world. But it also allows for opportunities, and this is where I think the Guam Product Seal discussion comes in very usefully, is it also provides opportunities for economic development. And then, of course, one of its main goals is to preserve that art form or that tradition, that material culture in and of itself. There's also the World Intellectual Property Organization, and They can provide technical assistance. So again, this may be something that can be accessed by a non-governmental organization should they want to take on these sort of efforts. And they can provide assistance in this sort of way about developing intellectual property strategies for a group of people or a nation. They can provide, there are some terms like traditional knowledge and expressions of culture, TKEC, or traditional cultural expressions. And those are helpful to think about because they are some of the ways that the larger world community has been thinking about these sorts of issues. And there is something called the Pacific Model Law that they developed. It was quite a few years ago now, but to try to create a model that might make sense in the Pacific. And so that might be something when we break into our working groups, that might be something that one of the groups would be looking at to see if it has any applicability for us. Next. And then there's the Secretariat of the Pacific Community. It's changed names a couple of times, but the acronym remains the same, SPC. And they've done various work, but some of the work that I'm familiar with is they've done cultural mapping, which I believe Guam has participated in, and then helping entities develop cultural policies. So there are many ways that government agencies can actually be part of this cultural work. And they can be helping maintain it, helping make sure that it's part of their agency, or having it be important to them by recognizing the economic potential or the governmental potential in working with that property. If I could have the next slide. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. My presentation is pretty brief. So words and names can be things that need to be protected. We've talked a bit about the name Guam or any derivative of. And so it's important, I'm sure in the way that it's been worked on with the Guam product seal, to look at it in other languages, maybe, and we can ask Matt this when he has his presentation, if Guahan is part of that protection or if it's strictly Guam, even though both names are official for Guam, for the island, that might be something worth considering if it hasn't been taken up into law and expanded, or at least in policy. So let's go ahead. I think next we'll have a visual. So just recently, there are probably many examples that we can think of in this manner. The word or the term aloha has been challenged recently by the people of Hawaii. There were businesses that were using that term aloha. And even I think the recipe for poke has been challenged as belonging to the people of Hawaii. So with this one, it's a beer and it was named Bikini Atoll. And so there are different levels of why this was considered insensitive to the people of the Marshall Islands. First of all, the people of the Marshall Islands, that is a name of one of their atolls, so we can understand, I think we can relate to recognizing that they have the right to that name, even though it has been used in clothing attire for beach wear. We're all familiar with that kind of bikini. And even SpongeBob is in their World Heritage nomination because he lives at Bikini Bottom, right? And so they recognize that even SpongeBob has taken that name and done some things with it. So the Marshall Islands has led quite an effort to get this beer company to stop utilizing the name, but also it's associated with, in the way that the beer company is using it, associated with one of the largest tragedies that they've faced, and that is considered very offensive and culturally and just at a human rights level insensitive by them. And so again, I think we can relate to that, but I think it really tells us that we all have something to protect, and we never necessarily know when somebody might be coming after something that we consider naturally ours, and it might be something that we have to challenge on the island or on a larger scale. Next. So oral narratives. So it's probably perhaps easy for you to think of some of the controversial use of some of these oral narratives as well. If we can have the visual that goes along with that. Yeah. So there are many sides to the story. Many people are very much in support of the idea of the Polynesian oral narrative being out there and being provided this venue for more people to be aware of their oral narrative. But this narrative belongs to particular peoples, and there are different versions of it. There are many islands that have, and groups of people that share this narrative. And so there's been quite a lot of controversy. We have a lot of oral narratives. Thus far, I think pretty much the people of Guam, the Chamorros, have been informally recognized as owners of that, of those oral narratives. But again, we never know when that might be challenged by others. Next. Certainly we've had discussion of this by some of the representatives from Kaha and elsewhere in this commission, that songs, chants, and dance, they are something that are invented or created is probably a better word, created, developed, or maintained and nurtured by particular artisans and masters. But again, we have an example with Lilo and Stitch. That was one of the first examples that I had heard of, where some Polynesian songs were now being sung and copyrighted by Disney. And so the people of Hawaii were very concerned about something like this, about who had the right to share a song that perhaps belonged to them as a people, or a group within the larger set of Hawaiian people. Let's see if I have a visual for that next. Yeah, so there's Lilo and Stitch. Next. And then cultural symbols and patterns. So this one we might not recognize, maybe we're less familiar with it, but not too long ago, I think this was just a couple of years ago, Nike had developed not only leggings as their activewear, but they had developed this whole activewear line. And what had happened was, these are actually symbols, tattoo cultural symbols that belong to a particular clan in Samoa. They are part of that clan's intellectual property rights. They have particular meanings that nobody else is supposed to be wearing or having access to. And Nike had done so without gaining any permission to do so, as far as I've researched and understood the situation. And so Samoa, again, they had to protest. They maybe didn't necessarily have a legal recourse, and so they had to have a public recourse. They protested and protested until Nike did voluntarily withdraw and pull that activewear line. And again, we have many cultural symbols that were imprinted on indigenous Chamorro pottery, that were painted on or carved into cave walls. There are very many, that's not very good grammar, but there are many of these symbols that the Chamorro people have that need protection. Next. And then food. So I mentioned the example of the poke, but then also, does anybody recognize what this is? It's maybe a little hard when it's out of context. Yes, very good. It's the Japanese rice crackers. And the reason that I have a photo of that is one time when I was visiting one of the other islands in the Marianas, I had come across a rice cracker that was labeled as finadeni flavored. And so I thought, well, cool. And then I looked at who was making it, though, and it was made by a Japanese company. And I thought, oh, wait, maybe that's not such a great thing. If it was a local entrepreneur, perhaps it would have made more sense, right? They're taking a local recipe and they're utilizing it. But again, to me, it points back to there are all kinds of things that we have that perhaps need protection as individuals, as bodies or groups of people, or as an indigenous people in their entirety. Next. And then medicine. So there we have Mama Chai, one of our eldest Soamti or Surahanas. And again, this is something around the world that perhaps needs some protection. We've heard of companies going to places like the Amazon or to Australia and then trying to find out what their traditional recipes are. And we do have very active and very good at the healing arts, Soamti, Surahanas here. And they have traditional medicines that have been passed on through the generations. And one of the first things, again, that was triggering some of this thinking for me was, again, I was in one of the other islands within the Marianas, and in one of the spas, they were using traditional medicinal names for the types of spa treatments, and maybe were even using portions of that medicine to go with the massage. And so I had really wondered about whether they had worked with the holders of that traditional knowledge or whether it was something that was just a commercial venture. And certainly I would like to advocate for the protection of that's something that belongs to the Chamorro people or perhaps the body of healers. Or maybe even more specifically, that would be something that we would need to determine how those different levels of protection would work. And then if we could have the next slide, I think there's just a very little bit more. So all I was doing at this point was just letting the Marianas History Conference know that we are a commission and we are indeed working, meeting monthly, and that we're working towards these different patents, trademark, and copyrights laws. So some of them are in place as we've been being informed by the former attorney out of the Attorney General's office. Next. And today we'll be hearing from Guam Product Seal. Next. And just letting them know that the impetus for this commission was the Festival of Pacific Arts, just bringing into everybody's minds that we were going to be hosting a lot of activity here, and that meant it was a wonderful opportunity to showcase the artists and the Chamorro culture of Guam, but it also meant that there was potential for it to be challenged perhaps like never before. And so we're still carrying out that work because it is quite detailed and quite complex to develop mechanisms for protection, and as we have talked about over the last few meetings, about how to enforce it as well. Next. And then, of course, the work that we are specifically doing. And this is something we may want to consider. So What I mean is, in the upcoming meetings, when we are talking about and developing how we're going to develop our subcommittees, we may want to break it up according to the two different sets of policy recommendations that we're to be doing. We could either work at one altogether. I think maybe splitting us up into two separate groups to work on it simultaneously might be a bit much for our 6 to 9 to 11 members. So maybe what we can be thinking of in the back of our mind is which one we would want to be tackling first. And then we'll continue to discuss that through November and hopefully make final decisions in December. So that should conclude my presentation. Next. Yes, so Saina Ma'asi to everyone for your attention today and formally their attention at the Marianas History Conference. So we'll now move into Matt's presentation unless anybody had anything they wanted to discuss or ask from that presentation. But I think it was pretty straightforward, right? Yeah. But we'll go ahead and move into Matt Boz's presentation.
Hafa again, good morning to the commission. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a sore throat, so if I'm a little bit raspy, that's not on purpose. As the senator said, the chair said, Gita manages the Guam Product Sale Program, and I think the Guam Product Sale Program is the one program that is most analogous to kind of what the bills, the law is, the Trademark Commission law is trying to do. So we're here today to give you an overview of the Guam Product Sale Program and some of the regulations. With me is Tria Paulino. She kind of runs the day-to-day Guam Product Sale with Miss Mary Camacho, who wanted to be here, but she's at GCC actually doing Guam Product Sale outreach right now. So she's doing the nuts and bolts work while I'm here talking to you guys. So next slide, please. So the Guam Product Sale was established in the late 80s. And one of the main reasons why it was established was there were products that were not made in Guam that said the word Guam or Chamorro on it. And the government at the time wanted to find a way to differentiate those products from products that are genuinely made in Guam. So they established this Guam Product Sale. It was first given to the Department of Commerce at the time. Then when the Department of Commerce went away, it was transferred to Revenue and Taxation. And then finally 7 years ago now, it was transferred to Gita. If you look at that, that's the old Guam Product Sale. And on the right is the new Guam Product Seal. So if you go to the store and you see a product with this seal on it, it's made in Guam. If it has it and you kind of think it isn't made in Guam, please call us and we will let you know whether or not it should have a seal or not. That's one of the things that we do. We field a lot of calls from people, oh, this product has a seal, should it have a seal on it? And we'll say either yes or no, and thank you for letting us know, and we'll try to track down those people. Next slide, please. So as I said, the first and main purpose of the Guam Product Sale is a regulatory purpose. It regulates the claim that someone wants to make that an item is made in Guam. So if they want to say something's made in Guam, they need to come to Gita and fill out a form and do all those things to get the seal. Second, and this is what we've tried to work on since we've received the program, is to try to find a way to promote manufacturing. With what limited resources we have, we try to use this also as a marketing tool and sort of a promotional tool to say, hey, support made in Guam, support local products, support your local manufacturers who are your friends, your family, your neighbors, and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lack of awareness of the program, because in the total number of businesses that are registered at Rev and Tax, probably the percentage that have a Guam Product Sale is like 1% or less. It's a very small number of businesses that are, really coming in saying we're manufacturing in Guam. And it's important to know that this is for manufacturing. This isn't for any other type of business, right? So it's not for a service business or someone who's manufacturing products in Guam. And then the applicable Guam statutes, 12 GCA 50, Guam Administrative Rules 4, Article 1. So those are just sort of the laws that we use to guide us. Next slide, please. Eligibility requirements. And this is sort of how we start thinking about for the Trademark Commission, and when we start talking about not necessarily the IP aspect of it, but the cultural trademark certification program, which is number 2 on the list. This is where we start thinking about this kind of stuff. So 1, of course, the item can only be manufactured in Guam. 2, there needs to be a substantial transformation of the product, and 50% of the value of the product needs to be added in Guam. So no more than 50% of what's inputted in a product can come from outside of Guam. Substantial transformation is taking something and turning it into something of a substantially different use. That's like taking flour, water, sugar, turning it into a cookie, water, tea leaves, turning it into tea, that kind of stuff, or soap and whatnot. Of course, the law requires that anyone getting a Guam product seal, the business owner has to be a U.S. resident or a citizen, and they must have a valid Guam business license. So GITA will not entertain anyone without them first providing a valid Guam business license that shows that they're actually in the business of making whatever they say they're making. Without that, we cannot proceed. Next slide, please. And this is the application process. Now that I look at it, it really should be a circle because it's an annual thing, but I did it as an arrow. So first thing that a company will do is they'll come to GITA and they'll say, I make this product and I want to get a Guam product seal. We'll either give them a form or they'll get the form online, they'll fill it out, and they'll include in that form every item that they want to get the seal for. So if a company is going to, let's say it's a bakery and they're going to do cookies, bagels, and a third item, they'll list the 3 items. And then they'll provide to us a breakdown of the cost to manufacture these items, and they'll show the value added either at wholesale or retail, depending on they sell it wholesale or retail, and then they will provide a detailed description of how they make the product. So they need to provide all of that to GITA before we can proceed further, along with the $25 application fee. So it's an annual $25 fee. What we will do then is we'll take the form and we'll look at it and we'll say, okay, this company says they're going to do this, and we make sure all the information is there. And then after that, we will schedule a site inspection. The law requires that GITA go out and conduct an inspection of the facility, the manufacturing facility. So we can go out there and we can verify that, yes, they're really baking the cookies there, they're really, baking the cakes there, or whatever they're doing. And after we do that, we go back, we take pictures, we go back and we prepare a report. And that report will detail everything that they said, everything that we saw, and we'll have pictures and it'll all be attached. And once that's approved and the verification of the 50% and substantial transformation is proven and deemed true, we issue a seal. And when we issue the permit for the seal, we provide them the parameters of how they can use the seal, and let them know you're free to use the seal on those products that we have inspected. So if a company wants to add another product or add another line of whatever, they need to come back to GITA and let us know that, we're going to add on this, so that when we go to the store and we see it, we know that it also has a seal. That may necessitate a new inspection, it may necessitate a new filling out of an application form, and then it goes through the whole process again. And these seals are valid for the entire year that the business license is valid. And then every year they must come back in and they must renew the seal. So when they get a new business license, they come in and they renew a seal. There's like a 30-day grace period that we usually follow. So if the seal expired June 30, any time that they come in during July, it's okay, because we know that they're also getting the business license at the same time. So there may be some overlap in the things that they need to do. But it's all contingent on the business license. Next slide, please. And then there's some exemptions as to who needs to get a Guam product seal or not. If someone's going to manufacture items in Guam solely for export, and they're not going to resell them in Guam, they don't necessarily have to get a Guam product seal. Original artworks, pieces of art, are not required to get a Guam product seal. If you're a business that makes less than $5,000 a year in gross sales, you don't need to get a Guam product seal. I mean, you also don't need to get a Guam product seal if you're just putting Guam on an envelope or anything to mail it out. So they put that in just to make sure that they aren't making you have to get a Guam product seal every time you address an envelope or whatever. But if you're going to print a postcard in Guam, for example, I would think that would need to get a Guam product seal because that's a product that, it's a product. Next slide, please. And there's also an exception. And the main exception is for farmers, agriculture. So farmers, fishermen, they don't need to get a Guam product seal. So if you're going to grow papaya and then you're going to sell the fruit to a grocery store or directly, you don't need to get a Guam product seal. This does not extend to food preparation or packaging. So like if someone's going to take bananas and a farmer's going to take bananas, turn it into chips and then bag it and sell it, that becomes a prepared perishable, it's a food product that's processed. That would need a seal based on our understanding of the rules and regs and the law. Next slide, please. And I think this is what the senator was talking about Guam and Chamorro. So first and foremost, it's illegal for a product in Guam to say made in Guam without a seal. So if they're going to say made in Guam on a product, they need to have a seal. And that's one of the things that we do our best to let retailers know. Retailers and people who actually sell products at stores. We let them know that if someone's going to come in and say it's a made in Guam product, please ask for a copy of their permit if you can. Because that will help them out. And we know of some vendors and some stores who are very diligent about this and they won't accept a product that this is said is made in Guam without first getting a copy of the permit. Because there are, if you look at this, the violations on item B, any business establishment who sells products that say made in Guam that aren't made in Guam are also liable for certain penalties and fines. So the law allows for penalties for the manufacturer or the person who makes the product or brings in the false product, as well as the person or the company that sells the product that's not made in Guam or doesn't carry a seal. So it's very important that the retailers understand that as well. And as I think that might be something to consider when we're going through that cultural trademark certification is if you want to mandate that retailers also need to follow some sort of rules regarding selling products. And then item C is what the senator was talking about with regards to the word Chamorro or Guam. So the Guam product seal law says the word Guam or Chamorro or any derivative thereof. So if they spell Chamorro instead of with the capital C and the capital H instead of CH, or I would assume that even Guam or Guahan, because they're both derivatives of the same word, it's unlawful for any perishable product to have those items on it without the origin of where the product comes from to be listed twice. The first place it needs to be listed is on the front of the packaging, and here's where it's a little bit confusing, and Gita tries to approve these as much as possible, where the made in has to be equal in length to the word. So if Guam is 2 inches long on the packaging, it needs to be 2 inches long saying made in China, and then half the height. So if it's a 2 by 2 square that says Guam, it needs to be 2 by 1 that says made in China or made in the Philippines or wherever it's made from. And then it has to, of course, say it somewhere else on the packaging. And the size restrictions there aren't as stringent. But on the front, it needs to be same width, half the height. And any company who doesn't do that is also liable for some fines. Next slide, please. And that's basically what's on this slide, so you guys can read all of that. And like I said, that's mainly for perishable commodities, because that's sort of where we see most of the confusion is in the perishable commodities. So the legislature a few years ago adjusted the law to allow specific requirements for double labeling on perishable consumer commodities. Next slide, please. And then these are just some points to consider that Gita was talking about while we were going through this trademark commission. The trademark, apart from the intellectual property law, the second requirement is to establish a sort of trademark certification program, and we were talking, is it a symbol like the Guam product seal? Is it just going to be sort of signing off on it? But these are some points to consider. How will we connect the two, and will we connect Guam product seal? Will it be a triple process where if you're going to certify artwork, will they also need to get a GPS to certify the manufacturer of the artwork? I mean, those are points to consider. How will we market and outreach this program? Because that's one of the things we at GITA do our best to do with limited resources, is how do we get the word out that, you know, if you want to say made in Guam, you have to get a Guam product seal. If you're a customer, look out for the Guam product seal, stuff like that. I mean, will we follow a similar certification to GPS for cultural artwork? Is this a framework we want to see for that? Or because it's artwork, is there some sort of different style of certification that will be needed? Stuff like that. Will it only deal with products that are manufactured, or will we be giving out cultural trademarks for art that's not necessarily going to be manufactured? Because the GPS is for manufacturing, and the Trademark Commission law talks about manufacturing, but it doesn't say that you only need to certify artworks that are manufactured. So there are just a lot of questions, and I think the Guam product seal can serve as a good sort of beginning framework for the second half of what the law is requiring the Commission to do. Once we establish what intellectual property and all those other things are. So, and like I said, one of the other things is vendors. So when we think about the artist and the vendor, how are we going to regulate both so that we make sure that everyone's following the law? So that's basically sort of GITA's take on how the Guam product seal can sort of relate to the Trademark Commission and our goals, because like I said, the GPS law regulates both the manufacturer and it tries to a certain extent regulate the vendor. And I think that's about it. Next slide. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Sainamasi for that. A lot of really good points to consider. It's important for us to see how it's operating, and very good discussion about some of the enforcement, because that is perhaps one of the more difficult issues. I mean, there are a lot of complexities all along the process, but enforcement may be one of the more difficult areas to ensure. So as you were speaking, and others can chime in also with questions or thoughts, but, and I've probably heard you say it before at a presentation, but it really struck me this time when you were saying that we could call and ask whether it should have a seal on it. And I don't know that it had quite occurred to me that someone might put a seal on it to make it look like it's been approved, or maybe even a very similar seal as Attorney Stacy had us look. Sometimes there can be very similar looking things that are somewhat different and therefore maybe can slide by, but to the visual test, they might be making us think of something incorrectly. So yeah, I guess I had very sort of straightforwardly thought that if there was a seal on it, it was because they went through the process, but that's a good point. There may have been a product within their line that they hadn't gotten approved, or perhaps they had not renewed their product, or, and as I've traveled here and there, I've seen, well, quite a variety of imitation things, right, where they make it look like it's coming out of, when I was in Vienna, in Italy, even the glass, the hand-blown glass that's supposed to be their particular art form, it was being produced in another country, and so people were having to be very particular, and even if it said made in Vienna on it, that did not guarantee anything. So that was a really good point that you have brought up. And then I know it's an issue that we've discussed from time to time. With that 50% having to be transformed or manufactured on island, has that been a difficult part for assessment? Is there a particular process or set of criteria that helps GITA assess that?
Well, what we do is we try our best to provide sort of a framework that they can input sort of, okay, this is the cost of everything I bring in to Guam. And so we have sort of like a spreadsheet that we ask them to fill out. And a lot of times, especially when you're dealing with smaller, like, you know, sole proprietorships, they're not too sure. So sometimes they ask for help understanding where they need to put certain things. So we do our best to try to help them understand, okay, you put it here and then this comes from off island, put it here. Your costs here, you know, because there's other costs involved, right? It's not just the cost of the item, it's labor costs. If you had to pay someone to make the item, if there were costs, all those kinds of things, you input it. And it has to equal, like I said, no more than 50% from outside of Guam. So we do have sort of a spreadsheet that we have them follow, and we do our best to verify that, and we try to back it out and kind of see, okay, it's 50%. So that's more of an objective thing because it's just numbers based. The substantial transformation is the inspection. That's when you actually have to go and look and see that, okay, yeah, they really did take this and turn it into this. So that's based not on numbers, but based on going out there and really looking at it and taking photos and then verifying it through an inspection. And, you know, at GITA, we don't want to be punitive in nature. So our first goal is to see, okay, they're saying something's made in Guam. Let's look at it and make sure that it is. And if they're having a little bit of a difficulty explaining the numbers, but we're confident that it is 50%, we sit down with them and try to explain it. And it's the same thing when I said someone comes in, call us if something has a seal that you think isn't right. Our main goal for that, again, is not to be sort of punitive or to be sort of to come down. We don't want to stifle economic development. More often than not, some people put the Guam product seal in their product, and it actually is made in Guam. They just didn't know they had to go through a process. You know, they found the seal and, oh, I make this in Guam, they put it on. And, you know, oh, they go through the process and they're fine. And when they're not, more often than not, they're okay, I'll take it off. So, you know, at the end of the day, we try to keep the program where we balance the regulation with sort of not trying to stifle economic development and sort of, you know, entrepreneurship. But you are correct. We do have a spreadsheet and a formula that they fill out, and they input the numbers. How they describe their manufacturing process to us is totally up to them. We don't have like a ABCD. We just say, write it down and give it to us. And then, of course, the substantial transformation, which is the more qualitative, we have to look at it. That's handled by going there, sitting down with them, talking to them, asking them questions. And more often than not, they're very, I don't think we've ever run into anyone who was trying to like deceive us. You know, they were very honest and very upfront with this is how we make things and stuff like that.
Yeah, I have a question, and the Trademark Commission right now is diligently working on trying to protect what is obvious for a lot of us indigenous people here. This also pertains to GITA as well as to revenue and tax because it rolls into. Is there any language? I understand. I spoke to your representatives from GITA because I'm currently involved in producing products made in Guam by practitioners. And this is based on traditional knowledge and reproducing items that were produced a long time ago. Is there any language in GITA that can somehow, I know they explained to us about coming over and seeing the process and taking pictures and things like that, and then you affix the Guam product seal. Is there any language in your, meanwhile, before the Trade Commission becomes in fruition, that can really protect that intellectual property and that process? When I spoke to your representatives, I realized that Guam product seal is very loose. And I totally understand because it was geared for Guam economic development. Okay, our concern now is that we're moving into producers, practitioners that are producing iconic images and symbols like what you mentioned earlier that are relevant to our people. And moving into that realm, what is it now? Meanwhile, prior to the Trade Commission being solid in their protection and all that stuff, what do we have? Because you guys are the only ones really that are in operation in that form that can really give us some kind of foundation in protecting what we're producing so other people do not. Okay, and that's my question to you.
Well, based on the law, it does not. You have to remember the Guam product seal isn't, I don't want to, it's not based on culture. It's based on manufacture, right? So at this point, you are correct. So if you have a local practitioner who comes in and wants to at least verify that, yes, this is made in Guam, then yes. I mean, what we would do probably is when we do the inspection, we would highlight the fact that this is made by a local artisan or a local practitioner. So at the very least, in our official inspection, it will be highlighted that this is a locally manufactured product by a local artisan or practitioner. So we can at least do that, but we cannot protect sort of the cultural aspect of it. And I think that's why I brought up the idea of how will this cultural trademark work with the Guam product seal. Now, we could, and that's up to the commission, right? So, for example, anybody can make a product in Guam. Anybody at this point can make something that they claim to be a culturally indigenous, culturally appropriate product of any sort. How GITA can validate that on our end, we don't know, because we're not experts on art and culture. So, for example, I always bring up the idea of using the actual Guam seal on a product. More often than not, if someone comes in and wants to put the Guam seal, they come in saying, we're going to make this and we're going to put the Guam seal on it. One of the things we'll ask is, did you get permission to use the Guam seal on the product? Because there's a process for that. Now, ideally, maybe moving down the road with this trademark commission, we could say, if someone's going to come in and say, I'm gonna manufacture indigenous art in Guam of any sort, we could, and this trademark is up, we could say, you're claiming that it's going to be of this indigenous, whatever parameters the commission sets up, show us your proof that it's that before we can give you the Guam product seal. That might be a way that it will work, but you are correct, sir. At this point, there's no way for GITA to protect sort of the intellectual property or the cultural aspect of what's being made. We just verify that it actually is made here.
Just wanted to add that for more clarification, I think I understand that the Guam Product Seal law, the spirit of the law, was the intent to reduce imports, the importation of goods into Guam. So in the sense where, Sino Frank, you were talking about protection of indigenous art and culture, so that's from a protection standpoint, but the program that GITA's running is to spur manufacturing, the manufacturing industry, so that we can reduce imports into Guam. But I think, though, that with the program in place with the product seal, maybe there could be a subcategory where if there is an indigenous practitioner who comes in and says, I make this and I'm going to mass produce it, then there's more certification and there's more weight. My question is, for GITA, when you do outreach, is it just to promote the program to prospective manufacturers, or do you also promote the seal itself and the value of the seal, that what it represents, to community-wide, to visitors, so that they know what to look for?
We do both. One of the things that we're very cognizant of is, first and foremost, the regulatory aspect. We don't want anyone to be in trouble for not using the seal properly or not having the seal on their product. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that we're protecting the seal, that it's not being used improperly, and that everyone who's using it is true, and everyone who says that things are made in Guam are getting the seal. Apart from that, we do our best through social media, through being out at the various, every year we kind of go to, like, when the Chamber of Commerce has small business fair, we go there. like I said, Mary is up at GCC right now talking about Guam product sale. And the questions that come in are the whole spectrum. It's oh, can I get a seal for this product? To, oh, so what does the seal represent? To, if I go to the store and I see a seal, can I trust it? So everywhere we go, we get all of those questions and we answer them. Do I think that the government, if we do this trademark program, perhaps there should be some sort of more unified marketing efforts for it? But like I said, now with what limited resources we have to promote it, we do our best to let everyone know all aspects of the program.
Sainamaasi for the discussion, and I also want to point out, since we've been part of this commission, I've mentioned it before, but it really opens up my eyes so that when I go to a retail outlet, I'm really noticing even more so now whether an item has made in Guam on it and whether or not the Guam product seal is visible. And it seems to me that there's been some movement in the last year where it does seem that it's being showcased more so, especially in certain places. And so I think, as Rita was mentioning, or I think she was getting at, it creates that added value and it creates that buy-in, and then it all helps promote the intention as well as hopefully the safeguarding and enforcement of it. If we can, there's going to be a presentation here at 10. If we can go ahead and move to item 2B, unless anybody had any other major questions. So for item 2B on the agenda, we'll just keep the idea of the formulation of the Guam Trademark Commission committees in place. I think this is something that as we become more familiar with things kind of settle into place. I would have us look again, if just from time to time to refresh your memory, at the enabling legislation for our commission, and to look at some of the work that we're to be doing. And it mentions in there, I was also looking up some of our Pacific Island neighbors and the way that they've approached things for some ideas. But in there, it talks about types of cultural art, ways to authenticate, ways to validate the quality, the cultural content. So if you could look at those again, that's on page 3 of your Trademark Commission Act. Just to be keeping those in mind and then maybe doing some additional research. When we have our next meeting, we'll be getting, I think, some very good presentation that will further help us think those issues through. So again, in the legislation itself, it talks about 4 areas of arts, but I think developing subcommittees that are about the work is maybe more the way to go, and then each part of the work and the process will keep all of those 4 different types of arts in mind, so that we will definitely tackle those, but perhaps by forming different types of subcommittees rather than it just being art-based. So if there are no questions or thoughts there exactly, we can move on to item 3, which is the open discussion. And in the open discussion, I just want to put out my proposal for what we'll do for November and December. So for November, we'll have Dr. Sauter provide her presentation. It's a very good overview. It looks at some of the policies and laws that the Act itself refers to. The Native American Handicraft Act, I think, is one of them, and then also the New Zealand cultural program there. So she looks at several such programs, which I think is going to be very useful to us. And then if we could also have the Department of Revenue and Tax just walk us through those application forms and some of the basic information, such as the number of applications that the Department of Revenue and Tax typically deals with on an annual basis, just to give us an understanding of where our baseline is at right now. And let's see, yeah, the typical number of applicants, and whether there are any issues that you feel have been coming up that maybe could be addressed through our commission or otherwise, something for us to be aware of as we're moving forward. That's been an issue. And then in December, I suggest that we have a presentation by the Guam Visitors Bureau and have them discuss their Guam brand, both the development and the policies. And then I think after that, we'll be ready to have some real discussion of people's different thoughts about what type of subcommittees we want to be developing and whether we want to focus in on just one of our two tasks and which one that would be. So if we can keep that in the back of our mind, we'll get more information in November, some information in December, and then actually give our suggestions for developing our subcommittees, and then we'll be rolling up our sleeves in a sense and getting down to some real work. And so with the different presentations and the different discussion that members such as Frank and everybody really has brought up here and there, I'm really hoping that we make some really good progress as a commission so that we can make some good recommendations and hopefully see some policy by the end of next year, I'd like to say. Yeah, if not, I mean, I'd like to shoot for sooner, but yeah, at least get the ball rolling so that somewhere in next year, we can maybe get some actual policy being developed and submitted to the legislature for consideration. Yes.
Yes, I wanted to also add, maybe for the next meeting with Rev and Tax, like in the case of Sina Frank's concern with practitioners who are now producing, those who are ready to roll out, their products, what can they do now? What's in place? And I think that Rev and Tax is probably the only authority right now that has something in place, and so maybe that should be addressed.
That's a very good suggestion. So if the Department of Revenue and Tax can weigh in on that, let us know with the application process what kind of protection might be available on island now, unless you have some thoughts to share now.
Yeah, I think as a result of these hearings, these meetings that we've had, because of the public's, there's been an increase in the public interest with respect to how they can protect their intellectual property or their trade name or trademarks. So we encourage anyone who might want to explore what their protections, how they can protect their particular trademarkers or trade name, just come down and see if that's something that we could have you register at DRT. So, and we're always open, and we do have someone who has seen this program since its infancy, and who's still there and is very knowledgeable about what it is we can register. And so you might as well, explore how you can protect your trade name or trademark. Sooner the better. At DRT.
That sounds very good, to be able to get that information about what they are able to help protect and what can be registered at this point. And again, that will provide us a good foundational information.
I'd like to make a suggestion to you before we leave. With all these planning that you're doing, maybe a suggestion would be to see how you can get it so that it's all ready for the 2020 Festival of Pacific Arts. and it can be discussed in that forum, since all the Pacific Island nations are going to be meeting in Hawaii, and they normally use the Festival of Pacific Arts as a forum in the protection of intellectual properties for indigenous people.
That's an excellent suggestion. Saina Maasi for that. You're right. They are going to have quite a variety of forums. It's absolutely where I first heard about these sort of issues was at the Pacific Festival of Arts in Palau in 2004. And so I know it's very much in their minds. And as we've mentioned before, in the Pacific, they're very active because they have a lot of valuable intellectual property, material culture, and traditions to protect. So I think definitely we will continue to visit that to make sure that it is something that is discussed formally, hopefully, and maybe informally if not. But I think there's a good chance it'll be discussed formally. Maulik. Yes, it would be great to have Guam there being part of the lead or a panel or something. So with that, we're now running very close to the 10 o'clock. If there are no further items for discussion, can I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries to adjourn this Guam Trademark Commission meeting. The time is now 9:57, so we're just squeaking right in before the 10 o'clock. So Juice Masi for your attendance and participation in today's Guam Trademark Commission meeting, and I look forward to seeing you all in November. Oops, yeah, November. I've got my months right.